And I have to find.じゃあ5分前に時間になる前にチャットでメッセージを送りますね。Okay. Oh, it's already 1 o'clock. So I guess we should get started. So thank you very much for joining us today on a sunny afternoon here in Tokyo. I hope that every one of the participants, you can also hear me clearly, and everyone else. We're very excited today to have this symposium about our collaborative research. And since it is a very tight time schedule, we will start right away with Shimizu Norio, who is going to introduce the symposium today.
Hello, and my name is Shimizu Norio. I'm from Meiji University, and I thank you for joining us today. Today's symposium aims to present the result of a joint research project founded by JSPS, and of which I am a representative. Our group consists of scholars specializing in the history of ideas and the history of early modern Japan. Our first investigation, which lasted from April 2016 until March 2019, focused on the investigations of the scholarly exchanges around the merchant academy Kaitokudo. Our current investigation, which began in April 2019, concentrates on the Jusha, or scholars, of the second half of the 18th century, and with a particular focus on Rai Shunsui. The content of the presentations today aim to showcase our endeavors from the perspective of our respective specialties. We all look forward to your feedback and a fruitful exchange of ideas. Thank you.
So thank you very much. So we have now that you know where our actually our collaborative project is situated, it is connected to various grants that we have received in the past and currently are receiving. Through the chat, I just circulated our resume, our little summaries of all the talks for today that might help you. Please keep in mind, though, those are not for circulation. This is really just for you here in case that sound quality gets bad or we have some other problems with technology. So those are for your convenience. But please, do not share them with others. These are really just simply drafts and not publications in the sense. I hope you all can see it, the file. If not, I will maybe in half an hour again send out the file for those who have joined us in the meantime. So without much further ado, let us begin with our first presentation. So can I ask Asai-san to continue, and I will mute myself.
So, I am Asai Miyabi. I am honored to be given the opportunity to make a presentation today. In this presentation, I will begin with an overview of the trend in the exploration of Confucian scholars by the road of the Hiroshima domain and the process by which the domain school was established. I will then explain how the importance of samurai education in Hiroshima increased through a discussion of the specific educational content in the schools. Confucian and Confucian scholars had been in service to the Asano family since their days as rulers of the Wakayama domain. In particular, the Hori and Hayashi families. When Asano Nagaakira was transferred to Hiroshima in 1619, Hori Kyoan accompanied his lord as physician. 3 years later, upon leaving Hiroshima and going into service with the Owari Tokugawa family, Kyoan recommended Ishikawa Jozan in his stead. Jozan lived in Hiroshima for 14 years in the pay of an outside retainer. The second domain lord, Asano Mitsuakira, employed Kyoan's eldest son, the Confucian scholar Hori Ryoan, and Kyoan's grandson, the Confucian doctor Kurokawa Doyu, along with apprentices from the Hori and Hayashi families. However, while in the employ of Mitsuakira, Ryoan and Doyu remain living in Kyoto, visiting Hiroshima only occasionally. When the Hori family later split into northern and southern branch, from the generation of Ryoan's son, Moka and Ranko, they too remain in Kyoto. Hori Nanko and Hori Keizan, who became Confucian advisor in 1719, also lived in Kyoto, even when they became official tutor in Hiroshima and Edo for the 6th and 7th domain lord, Munetsune and Shigeakira, respectively. In the late 17th century, during the rule of the 4th domain lord, Asano Tsunanaga, along with Hori Nanko, the following men were employed who all lived or moved to Hiroshima except Nanko: Tsumura Sotetsu, Amagi Riken, and Terada Rinsen. These men were all disciples of the Hayashi family. In addition, Asai school Confucians were also hired from the late 7th to the early 18th century. Ueda Konbai, Kato Jisen, and Kaneko Rakuzan. In the time of the 5th domain lord Asano Yoshinaga, lectures were held on the 5th and 25th of every month from 1715 on. Further, in 1760, Amatsuge Nosuke was hired in order to educate the samurai in their private school. From this point on, domain policy indicated that those who establish a private school and become educators will be provided with payment in rice from the domain. In 1725, Asano Yoshinaga established the Kogakusho or lecture hall in a part of the Hakushima practice hall, a place for samurai and their children to practice martial arts, and appointed Terada Rinsen as the instructor. In 1734, the lecture hall was renamed Kogakan, and which time Rinsen established the Kogakan 3 rules of study. However, in 1743, the Hakushima practice hall was abolished under the pretext of downsizing, and the Kogakan was closed as well. The lectures held in the castle monthly on the 5th and 20th were apparently also cancelled. If you are to take a quick look at who these Confucianists were, we notice the following. In the beginning, Hori Kyoan and Ishikawa Jozan employed as a doctor and outside retainer respectively. Then Confucianists of the Hori family were hired but remained living in Kyoto. And from the late 17th century on, Confucianists were employed to live in Hiroshima, and many of them came from outside. Moreover, some formed the Confucian scholar family of their own. In the Hiroshima domain, the employment of Confucianists and the formation of the Confucian scholar household had occurred much earlier than we know from example of other domains. This can be seen in samurai education in the form of castle lectures and private school, as well as the subsequent establishment of the Kogakusho. However, the downsizing in 1743, which implied the closing of the school and stopped the castle lectures temporarily, means that samurai education only continued to take place in Confucian private schools. In 1781, during the rule of the seventh domain lord Asano Shigeakira, the Gakumonjo school was established in the second hall of the castle Sannomaru. As can be seen in the diagram, the Kogakusho, which preceded the Gakumonjo by half a century or so, was next to the northernmost of the castle. The closer location of the Gakumonjo suggests the increased importance of samurai education. In the same year, Rai Shunsui became Hiroshima domain's Confucian scholar. Other employed Confucian scholars included the three existing Asai school scholars, Ueda Shuei, Kato Sanpei, and Kaneko Gennai, as well as Masuda Raiji of the Kogaku school, brought up from the status of foot soldier, and Kagawa Shuzo of the Sechu school. Previous research suggests as well that Shigeakira employed Confucian scholars of various schools in order to prevent a bias toward anyone's goal. On 5th day of the 2nd month of 1682, a notice went out of the establishment of the Gakumonjo, and the opening ceremony was held on 11th day of the same month. However, in the end, the different schools quarreled over education policy, splitting the Gakumonjo into eastern and western side, with the Kogaku school teaching on the eastern side and the Shushi and Asai school on the western side. In 1785, the Hiroshima domain issued the Tenmei Edict against heterodoxy, restricting Confucianism to the Shushi school. However, Kagawa Nanpin's Shugyodo remained a domain-sponsored private school until the late 1840s. In the same year, a Gakumonjo lecture hall was opened within the domain residence in Edo. At home in Hiroshima, a plan was made for a school of literacy and material art in 1863, but it fizzled out for lack of funding. Let me first consider the diary of Rai Shunsui at the time of Gakumonjo was established. The period to analyze is from the first month of 1782 to the 6th month of 1783. The schedule for the year included closing the Gakumonjo on 18th day of the 12th month of 1782. Kagami Mochi ceremony for the sacred image at the Gakumonjo on 29th day of the 12th month. Payment respects at the castle and Gakumonjo ceremony on 1st day of the 1st month of 1783 and opening the Gakumonjo on 11th day of the 1st month. Throughout the year, the regular holidays were the Go no Hi and Ju no Hi of the month. From Rai Shunsui's diary above, along with historical material like the school system draft and Gakumonjo duty practices, we find the division of role among the Gakumonjo Confucian scholars as follows. Those included people actually involved in education, 6 Confucian scholars and 20 readers. The Confucian scholar roles included 2 on external duties, 1 on duty and 1 additional, as well as 1 lecturer, 2 leaders of group readings, 3 poem marker, and 1 officer, 1 big bookkeeper, 1 admission officer, and so on. Regarding specific schedule on each day, 2 of the 6 Confucian scholars were on duty from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. in modern day terms, wearing kataginu formal vest. Apart from this, lectures and group reading were also on the schedule assigned to the various Confucian scholars as below, so that those not on duty for the day were also involved. Other Confucian scholars' work outside the Gakumonjo included also to assist with human resources. The sixth Confucian specific schedule is as shown on the screen, color-coded by name. They apparently had 1 or 2 days off for every 2 days of work, not too dissimilar to our own working habit, allowing time for research and writing. They may have been working harder than us. Gakumonjo was open to students aged 8 or older, including second and third sons and illegitimate sons. They could study calligraphy, reading, and group readings. Some apparently lived in school dormitories. Lectures were open to those aged 15 or older, including not only samurai family, but also farmers, artisans, and merchants. Further, the schedule included lectures from roughly 9 a.m. to 10 a.m., group reading with interpretation from 1 p.m. to 3 p.m., and group reading from 9 a.m. The unequal hour clock meant that the timing varied by season, but some samurai are generally said to have worked from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. or so, with samurai education likewise held within these working hours, because the specific content and schedules of samurai education at the Kogakusho and Kogakkan are unknown. It was impossible to compare the changes in the education system before and after they became the Gakumonjo, but given that, as noted before, the Gakumonjo was placed within the castle and these hours, it can be said that the importance of samurai education had increased. Thank you very much for your attention.
Okay, thank you very much. That was a wonderful presentation. And let me just send to everyone quickly some of the things that you may not have seen in the beginning. So we have our question and answer section after the next presentation. So we always have two together so that you can ask all your questions. Also, in case that you have joined us later, let me redistribute one more time the presentations of today in a PDF file so that you can see where we are also in the program. And we are going now over to our next presentation. As you see, we're earlier in time, which is wonderful because that gives us a little bit more of leeway in terms of Q&A. So please, yes, go ahead, and it's all yours. Thank you.
Thanks, Oka sensei. I'm Motomura Masafumi of Okayama University in Japan. I would like to share my screen. The title of my presentation is An Exploratory Study of Life and Death in Shunsui's Diary. In this presentation, through the diary written by Rai Shunsui, a Confucian scholar of the late Edo period, I will talk about the reality of life and death, and especially of nursing care and end-of-life care, and Shunsui's awareness of these issues. To begin, I'd like to show you the contents of my presentation. First, I will introduce Rai Shunsui and his diary. Second, I will introduce the diary entries about the news of Shunsui's father's illness and examine Shunsui's actions and consciousness. Third, I will introduce the diary entries about his father's critical condition and examine Shunsui's behavior and perceptions. Let's move on to the next topic. About Rai Shunsui. Rai Shunsui was a Confucian scholar of the late Edo period. He was born into a merchant family in Takehara, Aki Province, present-day Hiroshima Prefecture. In 1776, at the age of 21, he began interacting with various intellectuals in Osaka and founded a private school. In 1779, at the age of 34, he married Shimizu, the first daughter of Inoka Gisai. Gisai is introduced in detail later by Shimizu Norio. In 1781, Shunsui was appointed as a Confucian scholar by the Hiroshima domain. As explained in detail by Asai Miyabi, Shunsui established a domain school that made Neo-Confucianism an official academic discipline. Furthermore, previous studies have pointed out that these activities of Shunsui influenced Matsudaira Sadanobu's Kansei Igaku no Kin, a prohibition of heterodoxies in the Kansei era. In my presentation, I explore some aspects of Confucian perception in the latter half of the 18th century by exploring Shunsui's perception of death. In order to approach Shunsui's perception of death, I focus on his diary. Shunsui's diary begins on the 16th day of the 12th month of 1781, when Shunsui was working as a Confucian scholar in the Hiroshima domain. And he continued to write it for 34 years until the second day of the 12th month of 1815, 2 months before his death at the age of 71. In the diary, he wrote not only about his work at the domain school, but also about his interactions with vassals of the Hiroshima domain, Confucian scholars, and others, as well as about his home and family. In this diary, there is no clear statement by Shunsui about what death is or how to think about it. But there are entries about the death of family members and people he interacted with, which he had faced in real life. In my presentation, I focus especially on the accounts of his father's illness and death to explore what these writings can reveal. Furthermore, what might be the significance of focusing on this description of Shunsui's father's illness and death? With regard to this point, I think we can approach the question of how Confucian scholars of the Edo period viewed and valued taking care of their parents, their own work, and so on. Taking care of parents may have been a matter of course for Confucians, who were grounded by the virtue of filial piety. However, the problem is not so simple. This is because the story of choosing the serve rather than take care of sick parents, found in the book Monzen, and the story of refusing to serve due to taking care of a sick grandmother, found in the book Mogyu, are both highly regarded as filial piety. Confucians were confronted with the difficult question of whether they should choose to take care of their parents or to prioritize their own duties. For example, at the beginning of the 17th century, Hayashi Razan, who served in the Edo shogunate, left a thought-provoking text about this issue upon the death of his own father. I think that paying attention to the account of Shunsui's father's illness and death provides us with clues as to how Confucians responded to these difficult choices. The three main points of my presentation are as follows. In nursing care and end-of-life care for his father, Shunsui shared the responsibility with his younger brother, Rai Kyohei, with Shunsui giving priority to his work at the domain school and Kyohei taking care of their father. Second, in dividing these roles with his younger brother Kyohei, Shunsui made use of a system for family care and end-of-life care. Third, there were cases where the system for family nursing care and end-of-life care could not be used. The first mention of his father's illness in Shunsui's diary is on 17th days of the 8th month, 1782. In this entry, it is mentioned that Shunsui's father is sick, so he is sending his younger brother, Kyohei, back home to Takehara to take care of him. Already 1 week earlier, a letter came to Shunsui from Takehara, and Shunsui sent a reply on following day. Perhaps this exchange of letters informed Shunsui of his father's condition, and Shunsui decided that his father needed someone to take care of him. So he decided to send his younger brother home. As for the fact that Shunsui himself did not go to Takehara, we can assume that it was difficult for him to take care of his father directly because of his work at the domain school. Since the establishment of the domain school in 1781, there had been academic conflicts among the Confucian scholars who had been appointed. And this had even caused conflicts among those who studied at the domain school. Also, since his younger brother Kyohei was not appointed as a Confucian scholar to the Hiroshima domain until 1785. It is likely that he did not yet have duties that he would have had to abandon to take care of his father at the time of the diary entry. And furthermore, we can assume that Shunsui's father's condition had not yet destroyed much at this stage. Given that later diary entries indicate that he rushed to his father's house as soon as possible when he learned that his parent was in a critical condition. In addition, Shunsui's other younger brother, Rai Shunpu, lived in Shunsui's father's house, and it is assumed that he and Kyohei took care of their father. However, there is no mention of this in Shunsui diary. The next entry is from the 14th day, 12th month of 1782. This entry describes how Shunsui submitted an application to return his father's house. This document is called Application for Returning Home in the diary. Before submitting this application, Shunsui consulted with Yoshikawa Teizo and Nikawa Junji, the domain school's officials. Shunsui wished to take time off and return to his father's house for about 6 days, from first day of first month to 10th day of first month in 1783. The reason for this was that the domain school was closed during this period, and there was no work to be done. From these descriptions, we can see that Shunsui consulted with the people in charge of the domain school in advance, and tried to take care of his father with as little interference as possible in the work of the domain school. On 23rd day, first month, 1783, Shunsui received a letter saying that his father was in critical condition. Shunsui submitted an application for nursing care and requested permission to go to Takehara to take care of his father. Shunsui requested a 15th day leave of absence. The nature of the application for nursing care that Shunsui submitted is discussed in detail in Kinsei no Josei Souzoku to Kaigo by Yanagiya Keiko, and the following is an explanation based on her research. During the Edo period, samurai could ask for leave to take care of their family members when they became ill, and this was almost always granted. This system had been functioning since the mid-17th century, and the shogunate established it as a law in 1742. Shunsui was appointed to the domain as a Confucian scholar, but his status was that of a samurai, so he was able to take advantage of this system. A closer look at the entry of 24th day, first month, shows that Shunsui did not list the number of days he would be absent when he first made his request. After submitting the document, Shunsui was asked to clarify the number of days of leave, and it shows that he resubmitted the document specifying 15 days of leave. According to Yanagiya, samurai usually requested 10 to 15 days of leave. The number of days requested by Shunsui can also be said to be average. However, considering the fact that Shunsui did not specify the number of days of leave at first, we can assume that 15 days was not the number of days that Shunsui thought he needed, but rather than he was asked to clarify the number of days and made adjustments. In other words, a range of 10 to 15 days was shared as a common sense number of days for family care and end-of-life care, and samurai may have made their request within that range. Before submitting this application, Shunsui first consulted with Yoshikawa Teizo, an official of the domain school, to express his desire to submit the application, and then he obtained the approval of Nikawa Junji and other Confucian scholars. Shunsui left for his father's house the next day after submitting his request and arrived in the evening. From this, we can infer that the application for nursing care was approved as soon as it was submitted. Shunsui's father died on second day of the second month. Shunsui consulted with Confucian scholars from the same domain and went into mourning for 50 days. This number of days of mourning is pointed out by Minagawa Meiko in her book, Rai Shizuko no Shufu Seikatsu follows. According to a law established in 1684, samurai were required to observe 15th day of mourning. But in reality, there was a tendency for samurai not to observe 50 days of mourning. In response, Shunsui consulted with other Confucians of the same domain and with their mutual cooperation, observed 50 days of mourning. Based on the above point, it can be said that Shunsui and other Confucians of the same domain were more conscious of complying with the laws and regulations set by the shogunate than following the trend of samurai of the same period in their behavior after a father's death. These are the entries written in the diary about Shunsui's father's medical treatment and death. From these entries, the following points can be made about his parental care and end-of-life care. It was his younger brother Kyohei who actually took care of his father, while Shunsui prioritized his work at the domain school. This indicates that Shunsui was able to prioritize his work at the domain school because he had only been working there for about a year and needed to make efforts to improve the school. And because his younger brother was able to take care of his father. It should also be noted that Shunsui's wife Shizu did not take care of his father. The application for nursing care was used when parent was in critical condition, and the application for returning home was used when parent was not in critical condition and required care. This shows that different applications were used depending on the condition of the parent's illness, and also suggests that there may have been a consideration to avoid burdening the people around him with the work of the domain school by taking care of his parent when the domain school was closed. Before submitting the application for returning home and the application for nursing care, Shunsui probably consulted with the domain school officials and other Confucian scholars to make arrangements to take a leave of absence. In particular, he first consulted Yoshikawa Teizo, who was instrumental in appointing Shunsui as a Confucian scholar in the domain school, indicating the depth of their interaction. The ofuregaki in the diary entry of 17th day, 4th month, 1783, shows the regulation regarding nursing care, especially for cases other than parental illness. The three main points are as follows. I would like to focus on the third point in this ofuregaki. This is that requests for nursing care were not allowed in all cases. This point has not been clearly pointed out in previous studies. Shunsui also went to Edo 6 times to work as a Confucian. If Shunsui's family had become ill while he was working in Edo, he could not have returned his home area to take care of them. In fact, in the Kankoku Kogiroku, compiled and published by the shogunate, there is an example of a man who quit his domain job to take care of his mother who lived far away. It is also important to note that there was cases where samurai had to choose between work and nursing care. Finally, I would like to summarize my presentation. In my presentation, I pointed out the following 3 points. Number 1, in nursing care and end-of-life care for his father, Shunsui shared the responsibility with his younger brother Kyohei, with Shunsui giving priority to the work of the domain school, and Kyohei taking care of their father. This is thought to be due to the fact that when the domain school was first established, there were conflicts between the academic schools, and it was not easy to take time off from the domain school work. Second, in sharing roles with his younger brother Kyohei, Shunsui was making use of system for family care and end-of-life care. Third, there were cases where the system for family nursing care and end-of-life care could not be utilized. This required further comparison and examination with cases of other domains in the future to see if it would become a characteristic of the Hiroshima domain. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you, Motomura Sensei, for this wonderful presentation. So we have had now two presentations talking about life and work of the scholar. And in one of them, so Asai-san, she introduced us to the actual work and work schedule and labor that these scholars had to do, maybe even working harder than we all do today. And we also have seen this old dilemma amongst Confucianists between loyalty and filial piety, and how that plays out in domainal and shogunal laws. So we do have now plenty of time for questions or comments. I would hope that maybe you raise them in the chat, and in case that you write them in English or in Japanese, in order to allow our speakers here, to allow them a little bit of time before they answer. The Q&A session is either in English or in Japanese, whatever you prefer. So I see already one question here. So maybe Motomura Sensei and Asai-san, can you see the question? Oh, okay. So we can start off right away. This is for Asai Sensei. Maybe you would like to respond to the two questions by Yamamoto Sensei. Can you see the chat? Can you see the question? You're still muted.
はい、すいません。ありがとうございます。はい。まず、文会は漢文作文の練習をする会だと思うのですが、どのような文を作ったかの記録は、そうですね、春水自身とか、他の学者が自分が作った、漢文に関しては、どういったものを、作ったかっていうことは残しているんですけれども、学生がどういった漢文を残したかっていうことは、特に記録には残っていないかなというふうに、今のところ、はい、思っております。というところでよかったですか。
Yes, I might just maybe quickly translate that, although I think that Yamamoto Sensei can do it so much better than I do. But anyway, so the question raised was about, so what in the school did they actually, what was the, are there any records about these assigned subjects, topics to these bunkai, where they were reading together. Because as you have seen, hopefully in the abstract, that in these meetings, they were given a topic and then the students were required to write up something and hand it in. And it would be, of course, wonderful to know, what were actually the chosen topics and so forth. And it seems that there are not really records left, if I heard it all correctly. But there's also a second question for.
はい、作文集はコンテンのない、司書失注のことでしょうか。そうですね。はい、あんまり深く考えてない。そうですね。そういうことを、はい、そういうことになるかと思います。で、ここ多分、訳を、作文中の訳を、多分、八虚位の作品というふうに書いていたので、多分そういったことをご指摘いただいたのかと思いますけれども、英訳が間違っている形かなと思います。作文の失注ということを。はい、ご指摘ありがとうございます。
I wish I could help. So this is really, well, it's about whether there were any reading helpers or not. And that's maybe Yamamoto Sensei will help out here, because that seems to be already quite, again, it's a question about the reading practices and what they were able to do in those and how much, they were trained in doing this. Actually, I missed this part here about the Hakubun. Oh, Shukai. Okay. Yes. But anyway, again, there seems also to be more limited records, if I understood that correctly. Maybe we can talk about this a little bit further on, or maybe if Yamamoto Sensei wants to add a little bit more information, maybe from other readings that he knows about, that would also be helpful. Anything? This side.
ありがとう。はい。よくわかりました。ありがとうございました。
すみません、申し訳ございません。ご指摘ありがとうございます。
いえ、私もなんか八虚位がもし読まれていたら面白いなと思ったんですけど、そうですね。でも、はい、まあ、白文だったらそうですね、訓点がないっていう意味なのかなと思いつつ、ちょっとわからなかった。はい。
はい、ご指摘ありがとうございます。すみません。
Would you mind now giving that also in English, your question? Because that, again, it seems you're talking about a special text.
Yes. So hakubun usually means when a Sinitic text doesn't have glosses, like kunten. But it could also be referring to Baizhui, the Chinese Han Dynasty poet and scholar. And I was wondering which one it was referring to, and it seems to be referring to the absence of glosses in this case. So that was my question. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for clarifying that also for me. So again, we're back here more to Confucian texts and probably poetry in the school level. Okay, wonderful. There's another question I see in the chat, and which is for Motomura Sensei. Mute.
日本語でも言って大丈夫ですか？
Yes, of course, please. I mean, the question, you can all see what it is, but
I'm
the
sorry,
answer, of course.
I speak Japanese. また、50日間の喪に服すとはどういうことですかっていう質問だと思うんですけども、これは皆川さんの研究所にも書いてあることですけど、武士の決まりとして仏記令っていうのがあって、そこで50日間親が死んだ後は喪に服すっていう決まりがあって、その親が亡くなった後いろいろやんなきゃいけないこととか決まった定まったこともあると思うんですけど、それ50日間やりましょうと。で、まあ、その間お仕事も休むことになると思うんですけども、そのことを指してます。でも実際には皆川さんの研究によれば、その武士は50日間も休んでなかったようで、この春水が、自分の父親が亡くなった時に 50日間休もうか、それとももっと短くしようかっていうのを他の受者と相談をして、受者である以上、きちんと定められた50日間っていうのを守りましょうというふうに受者たちの間で決めて、なんかこう守ったっていうことのようなんです。で、個人的に面白いと思ってるのは、春生はこう死んだ後のことは非常になんかそういうルールにのっとってこう、なんていうんですかね、父親の死を悼む行動をしてるんですけど、その死ぬまでのケアっていうのは、実際には弟たちに任していて、結構班の仕事を優先してるっていうところがですね、ちょっと興味深いと個人的には思っていて、こう死んだ後と死ぬ前のケアっていうのが彼の中でちょっとこう価値づけが、なんていうんですかね、違うと言いますか、意識がですね、違うことがちょっと興味深いなと思っています。長い答えですいません。
Okay, I try to do my best. I mean, I'm obviously here not the best interpreter to start with, but I mean, there are two answers that Motomura sensei gave. First of all, about these 50 days of mourning. So, I mean, there are various things that are included, and you can find that even in the Tokugawa law, where they say exactly what you're supposed to do. It's of course not as strict as the one that we would have in China. So it's if your father dies, but you know, there's of course certain levels depending on if the mother dies or the father dies or what kind of relative that is being done. And in case of Shunsui, it's interesting that while it appears that as a custom, most samurai would not actually adhere to the 50 days of mourning, but would, you know, start working earlier. Shunsui also made a point of it that he actually would like to adhere to these 50 days in order also to establish, of course, this Confucian ritual as being part of his entire educational system. So he wanted to have that. And there were, in his diary, there's lots of back and forth amongst various individuals, retainers and so forth about the length of the mourning. And it does include that he wouldn't work during that time. And, you know, it's a time of abstinence on top of it. And what also Motomura sensei pointed out is that he found it interesting when reading the diary that Shunsui, after his father's death, he was very much, you know, interested in adhering to these rituals of mourning and being, you know, correct about it according to these Confucian rituals versus the more practical part of actually taking care of his father while he was ill. He seems, you know, in the diary, it does not really come out that he was, you know, he would send him his brother because he was busy at school and so forth. So it does not really show the same type of intention. But of course, again, this is a diary, and the diary only records what the diarist thought of important. So hopefully the answer sort of was good for you. Did that answer the question that you had, Professor Tolstokuzo?
Thank you very much.
It's good to hear you.
Me too.
Okay, are there any other questions or comments that anyone would like to raise? We will hear, of course, much more about Dai Shunsui. And well, if you don't, then maybe, you know, a virtual hand of applause to our two speakers. Thank you again. And we will take now a break. Let's say, because we are on Zoom, it's really difficult. We don't want to have a too long break in between. So would perhaps be actually 14, 15. Would that be okay? In like 12 minutes, we continue. We have a short break. 休憩は2時15分までで Okay, so we will resume. We are faster. This is wonderful. On Zoom, it's very difficult to calculate the time, but also because it is on Zoom, there is not so much chit chat in between, so we should move on quickly after one after the other. We have 4 more presentations to go. So we'll see everyone at 2:15. See you all then. And hopefully, Shimizu Sensei, are you ready to? Yes, okay, so I'll mute myself.
Now, and my presentation's title is Interactions Among Confucian Scholars in the late 18th century, Nakai Chikuzan and Inoka Kisai and Hattori Risa. The purpose of this presentation is to examine the relationship between the Confucian scholars Nakai Chikuzan, Inoka Kisai, and Hattori Risa. When we consider their family relations and location, as well as their scholarly pursuit, we notice that in the late 18th century, interaction among the Confucian scholars was more diverse than previously established. In general, research on Confucian scholars in early modern Japan has been divided according to distinct academic discipline or schools. And one of the reasons for this is that the school of Yamazaki Asai were keen on being distinguished from others. However, over time, while the distinction into schools of thought remained, a new trend has emerged in which people were willing to engage in general communication, even with those who belonged to opposing schools. I believe that this can be attributed to the fact that Confucian interaction has become more diversified. To be more specific, we can identify cases where the connection is not only based on the same kind of scholarship, but also on geographical and blood relations. For instance, Nakai Chikuzan, Inoka Gisai, and Hattori Risa, in addition to their academic association, also have blood and geographical ties, and these multi-layered elements simply have influenced their academic exchange as well. Let me illustrate the multifaceted aspects of the relationship in the following. Inoka Gisai, also known as Shinoda Tokugawa, has often been the subject of study as the father of Rai Shizu, the mother of Rai Sanyo. Gisai's teacher seems to have been Suzuki Teisai. And since Teisai's teacher was Asami Teisai, and Teisai's teacher was Yamazaki Ansai. And so Gisai is often considered to belong to the Ansai school. And Gisai was also for some time committed to the Sekimon Shingaku school, and later appears to have belonged to Jushi school. Gisai is assumed early association with the Ansai school may make it seem odd for him to be associated with Nakai Chikusan, and given that the Ansai school was heavily criticized by the merchant academy Kaitokudo, to which Chikusan belonged. Yet, Chikusan's role in arranging the marriage between Rai Shunsui and Gisai's daughter Shimizu is well known. In fact, Gisai and Chikusan had known each other from before. For one, Gisai was actually related to Chikusan. And when Chikusan set up the arranged marriage between Shunsui and Shizu, he referred to the Shinoda family as a family to which he had a relationship by marriage, and that they had known each other for a long time. The background to their acquaintance is unknown, but the relationship by marriage can be reconstructed from Chikusan's written statement. In the same letter, Chikusan wrote, after the death of Goi Ranshu, his daughter was taken in by the Nakai family, and that became my stepsister. She married Nagashima Sosuke, and from the latter's mother's point of view, Gisai became thus her sister's son. This requires more explanation. First, who is Nagashima Sosuke, and what is his relation to Gisai? According to Meiji scholar Nishimura Tenshu, this young lady, whose name is Setsu, is the sister of Chikusan and was married to Nagashima Sosuke, who lived in Osaka at the residence of Nagai Iyonokami, a shogunal official. In addition, Nishimura says of Nagashima Sosuke, his first name is Yasutora, and his pen name is Rensa. And Ranshu's grandson Nagashima Yoshias, who proved Ranshu Miwa, is his son and a student of Chikuzen. The time when they married is unknown, but it must have been after 1762, the year of Ranshu's death. Let us further explore the relationship between Nagashima Sosuke and the Shinoda family. Gisai said that his mother, Tome, had a younger sister, Nui, and that Nui's husband was Nagashima Sosuke Yoshimitsu, and that Yoshimitsu's son was Nagashima Sosuke Yoshifumi. It is likely that the name Sosuke was used for generations in the Nagashima family. And given the phrase, from the latter's mother's point of view, Isai became thus her sister's son. And it is likely that the first name is Yasutora and his pen name Rensa, conveyed by Nishimura, are identical to those of Nagashima Yoshifumi, who is found in the Chi-in Shido. Thus, Yoshifumi is a cousin of Gisai, and if Ranshu's daughter married Gisai's cousin, their families became related. This is shown in Figure 1. This. And in other words, the relationship between Chikuzan and Gisai was much later. As Confucian scholars, they were both adherents of the school of Jushi, they were also related to the marriage of Ranshu's daughter and with Shunsui's marriage. Gisai became Shunsui's father-in-law, and Chikuzan acted as the go-between for this marriage. Even though at first glance, their academic convictions were not the same. Gisai may have been earlier a follower of Yamazaki Asai and Asami Keisei, and both whom he praised as understanding deeply the teaching of Jushi, and was also interested in the theory of the unity of Shinto and Confucian. And just as Gisai also made some remarks to Chikuzan to differentiate himself from the ancestry, to focus only on differences of studies and thoughts, other relationships are kept out of sight. This was also the most practical way of living well in the world among Confucian scholars of the mid-18th century, who were engaged in multi-layered relationships. Now, let me turn to the Hattori family. The relationship between the Kaitokudo and the Hattori family begins with Koi Ranshu and Hattori Baiho. Document shows that Hattori was a samurai in the service of the Hoshina family of the Ino domain. The Ino domain was headquartered in Kazusa, and also had territory in the Kamigata region. Baiho's father was the intendant of Hamamura in the Kamigata region, and Baiho followed in his footsteps and enforced the government. Baiho's academic teacher was Miyake Shosa. However, it seems that Baiho's interest was more in embodying the teaching of Jushi than studying only the abstract ideas and composing poetry. Chikuzan's favorable account describes Baiho's attitude as a practical approach, attributing this to the teaching of Miyake Shosei. Hattori Baiho had 4 sons, 2 of whom died prematurely. About the other 2 sons, Setsuo and Rissai, we learn from Koi Ranshu's letter to Rissai and Fukushian ni ataru sho. Baiho already knew Ranshu, and Ranshu suggested that he takes care of Baiho's son, and thus Baiho enrolled them in the Kaitokudo and entrusted them to Ranshu for their education. They probably entered the school between 1749 and 1751. Although Baiho was a member of the Asai school, and he chose to have his children educated at the Kaitokudo. The fact that he knew Ranshu was probably a big factor. Perhaps more importantly, however, was the fact that Baiho and his family were close to the Kaitokudo. Baiho's more practical approach was of such a high standard that it could inspire others, and Ranshu would have appreciated it. But if they lived further apart, he wouldn't have met Ranshu. Baiho was a competent official who practiced Confucianism, but he was not a scholar. In other words, it should be seen as a geographical link between the Hattori family and the Kaitokudo. This is how the Hattori brothers came to study with Nakai Chikuzan and his brother Nakai Riken, with whom they began a long association. The Hattori brothers spent only about 3 years studying at the Kaitokudo. They all served the Hoshina family in 1752. Thereafter, Rissai gradually learned towards the Asai school, with which Ranshu and Chikuzan became dissatisfied. The complaints by Ranshu can be seen in the letter Fukushian ni ataru, and that is already quoted. This letter is probably from 1753 or 1761. Ranshu criticizes the Asai school's excessive praise for Jushi on the basis of his father Koijiken's will and his own experience. Jiken called Asai scholars obstinate, and he told Ranshu and his colleagues not to get involved with them. After telling this story, Ranshu encouraged Rissai to be self-reflective. According to the record Boketsu made, the only scholars whom Rissai visited while in Kyoto were all of the Asai schools. Rissai may have been attempting to follow in his father's footsteps, but as a result, Rissai must have learned Asai school's bad habits as well. A letter from Chikuzan to Rissai shows that Rissai didn't avoid his bad habits. Chikuzan criticized Rissai's obstinacy as a student of Asai and Shosai, saying, if anyone criticizes Jushi, even with a single word, anger swells up in your eyes. It is probably no coincidence that his word of choice, obstinate, matches that of Jiken. The friendship between Shikuzan and Risai, however, continued in spite of this disapproving communication. Although Risai belonged to the Asai school, he is said to have been distinctive among these scholars, as the other scholars ignored writing. The pursuit was derived from his experiences at the Kaitokudo and from his contact with Shikuzen. The academic conflicts did not break the bonds of geographical ties. The above has examined the relationship between Nakai Shikuzan, Ainoka Gisai, and Hattori Risai. They are using them as examples and has shown the diversity of the relationship between them. In this context, it can be understood that not only studies and thoughts, but also family and local connections played a role in various ways. In order to achieve this, the number of people who are interested in learning about Confucian philosophy will need to increase to a certain extent. In short, the case study in this presentation can be considered as a reflection of the situation in which Confucian philosophy was widely accepted by the society. In the early Tokugawa period, those who studied Confucianism were a minority in society. In these cases, the connection between Confucian scholars is likely to be centered on studies and thoughts, and human relationships associated with them, for example, a teacher-student relationship. And it is not surprising that studies and thoughts have a strong influence on interaction between Confucian scholars. However, as time passed and Confucianism became more widely accepted in early modern society, people were increasingly exposed to its doctrine. Consequently, interactions between Confucian scholars were increasingly based not only on studies and thought, but also on other kinds of connections, such as blood and geographical ties. Therefore, it seems that Confucian interactions in reality was not based solely on studies and thought, but also took into account other connections. And this implies that it is important, especially in studies on the Tokugawa period onwards, to have as comprehensive a picture as possible of the much layered nature of Confucian personal networks. It is only with this in mind that we can grasp precisely the extent to which Confucians of the time was defined by their studies and thought. No. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this wonderful presentation. And as those of you who have been with us from the very beginning, you have seen how our presentations are now moving more towards the ideas of connections and links. So our first presentation, just to recap, was more about the content of work of a scholar. Then we heard about filial piety, and in our second presentation of scholars, Confucian scholars. And now Shimizu Sensei, he introduced us to the divisions of intellectual schools vis-a-vis actually personal connections, whether relationships between families or also physical ties that they might have. So thank you very much. And we are going more and more into that direction, because in the end, of course, I will entertain you with some graphics. But So let us go straight to our next presentation, and we will have our Q&A at the afterwards. We always have 2 presentations followed with Q&A. Okay, so maybe Takahashi Sensei, are you ready to get your stand? Okay, so thank you.
いきます。Hello, my name is Yasuhiro Takahashi from Tama University. Today, I'm going to talk about reading Confucian classic together by Shunsui and his network. From here on, let me read directly from the paper I have prepared. For today's talk, I studied the characteristic of Lai Shunsui's activities as can be seen in Shunsui Nikki, Shunsui's diary, with a particular focus on his reading of Confucian classic during the Tenmei period using Japanese biographical database, henceforth JBDB. There are 2 main observations that I gathered from my investigation. First, I found one fundamental difference in Shunsui's way of record keeping. While the diary does not mention the specific text of the Confucian classic that he read when he was at home in Hiroshima, his select readings is clearly recorded for the period of his service in Edo. It appears that location matters in the way Shunsui kept his record. Second, the diary also provides unique statements regarding Shunsui's interaction with others through the shared reading of Confucian classics. Next to the exchanges with Confucian scholars of other feudal domains, I also found that Shunsui interacted with tutors to the heirs apparent of other domains after he himself was appointed as a tutor to the heir apparent of his own domain. Certainly, there are other sources relating to Shunsui's interest in reading the classics that can be drawn on, including 正史成方万読に関する書き付け and 江戸詰め控え。But my investigation confirmed that Shunsui's social relations can be identified by using specific Confucian text titles as keywords when using the JBDB. Promoting the understanding of social networks, which is one of the objectives of the database. In other words, using the JBDB as a data source effectively revealed through keywords such as that Shunsui interacted not only with the Hiroshima domain's resident officials in Edo involved in the tutoring of heirs, but also with Confucian scholars from other domains through the reading of Confucian classics. Let me begin by briefly addressing the database. The JBDB is an ongoing project that aims to provide access to information on historical individuals and their personal, political, and social networks. One of the main projects currently conducted with the JBDB is to reveal the social networks of the Confucian scholar of the Hiroshima domain, Lai Shunsui, and thereby to understand social interactions among intellectual figures of the late Tokugawa period. Presently, Shunsui's diary is one of the core data sets of the JBDB. The document is a diary Shunsui wrote for about 35 years from 1782 till his death in 1816. From the diary, we learn what Shunsui did when he met others, i.e. his social connections. The diary can therefore be actively used as a dependable research tool to reveal his social networks. As of today, only the first 9 out of after 35 years of the diary have been entered into the JBDB. Entries incorporated into the JBDB so far are only those written in the Tenmei era and the second year of the Kansei era. Let me therefore focus on these years only as an initial case study. During the Tenmei era, Shunsui served back and forth between Hiroshima and Edo to serve as a resident official in Edo. Furthermore, he also served as the official tutor of Asano Narikata, the heir of the domain lord Asano Shigeakira, providing reading sessions and lectures. What books did Shunsui read with what kind of people during this period? I assumed that differences in Shunsui's activities during his service in Edo and when he went back to Hiroshima, as well as his social networks, can be made clear by using JBDB. In a previous study, Raikichi revealed Shunsui's educational philosophy by looking into Shunsui's kind of education given to both the domain heir Asano Narikata and domain retainers living in Edo. Since Raikichi was rather interested in the interpretation of Shunsui's educational philosophy based on the heir's education, he did not focus on the overall picture of Shunsui's activities during the Tenmei era. Let me therefore take the opportunity and explore the overall picture of Shunsui's reading of the Confucian classic during the Tenmei era. To that end, I made searches in the JBDB with keyword of major book titles, including those of the 4 books and the principal classic of Neo-Confucianism. The result shown in table 1. What characteristics does the list suggest? First of all, a difference can be noted between the period of his service in Edo and the time spent back home in Hiroshima. As mentioned earlier, Shunsui lived in Edo for a large part of the Tenmei era, as he was appointed to live in Edo. He left Hiroshima 8th month of 1783 and arrived in Edo on the 2nd day of the 9th month. However, he returned to Hiroshima 4th month of 1785 and 4th month of 1788 and stayed in Hiroshima for about 3 or 4 months in each period. Here his travel record. I should note here that there are no records left at all about his recording during the time spent at home. In other words, Shunsui did not enter in his diary what he read when at home during the Tenmei era. However, this does not mean he did nothing in Hiroshima. In Hiroshima, Shunsui was in attendance at the castle, met with many people, and gave lectures in the presence of the Lord. In this regard, there is no difference from his activities in Edo. However, Shunsui left no records on what he read in Hiroshima during those periods. Perhaps it was difficult for him working through a lengthy book as the periods of his stay in Hiroshima were rather short. Further, as the curriculum of the Hiroshima domain was consolidated as a Neo-Confucianist system in the 1785, Tenmei was a period in which Shunsui was very much preoccupied with this educational reform. On the other hand, Shunsui wrote about what and with whom he read in Edo in his diary because it was so important to him. 5 were records referring to reading history and books he read in Edo important for Shunsui. The relation is probably associated with his role as a tutor to the heir of his domain. Mentions of the Confucian classics in the diary entries written during Tenmei appear in tandem with the progress of the tutoring of the heir. Accordingly, results of the searches with the Confucian classics titles as keyword naturally dovetail with the previously mentioned 生死なり方判読に関する書き付け i.e. Notes regarding the tutorship to the dominial heir. For example, according to that record from 1783 or 1784 the tutoring program started with the analects with sessions about Shushi Shogaku interposed and then advanced to the Book of Filial Piety. In the following year, 1784, sessions on the analects ended, and those on measures started in the 9th month. Thus, several books were read in parallel, which we find confirmed in the same order as regarding in Shunsui's diary. Although it is true that his reading interests are not apparent from table 1, there is no doubt that the 4 books and Shushi, Shogaku, and Kinshiroku were extensively studied along with the work of tutoring the heir. However, the diary does not mention details of all his lectures and reading session because each reading session with the heir Asano Narikata is only described by the words Gozenko, which means lecture to the Lord apparent. Diary entries do not provide what they read or sufficient information of his reading activities. I assume that Shunsui did not feel the need to provide details of the heir tutoring in the diary because he wrote down such details separately in 生死なり方判読に関する書き付け and 江戸詰め控え。Next, let us look into Rai Shunsui's social network established through shared reading of the Confucian classic. Basically, a large part of his social network consisted of stakeholders in Hiroshima domain, including resident officials involved in the heir's education such as the Seki Geiki, Ino Kaname, and Takano Naiji. Specifically, these men held consultations with Shunsui regarding the heir's tutoring and Confucian classic reading sessions. Another characteristic is that his record states interactions with various Confucian scholars in his Confucian classic reading sessions, as for example, 服部立斎、宮原文蔵、赤崎源介、黒瀬哲司、和田鉄之丞。Who are they? Their profiles are implied in one of Shunsui's late works, Shiyushi, in which biographical information and achievements of Shunsui's scholarly fellows are provided. Shiyushi is a good source of information regarding Confucian scholars with whom Shunsui had intimate association. Hattori Rissai was known as a scholar of the Asai school and was a Confucian scholar associated with Nakai Chikuzan and Nakai Riken of Osaka Kaitoku-do, just as Rai Shunsui was. Rissai was honored with a land grant in the city of Edo and opened it a private school called Shinkodo. Miyahara Bunzo was a student at the school. Akazaki Gensuke is also known as Akazaki Kaimon from Satsuma, who was a tutor to the heir of Satsuma domain. As he returned home in Tenmei 3, and became an assistant teacher at the domain school Doshikan. This is a record of their interaction immediately before his return. Shiko in table 1 refers to Kurose Tetsuji. Shiko is the common name of Kurose Tetsuji, who was a retainer of the Hiroshima domain living in its Edo mansion. He was first committed to the Sorai school following in the teaching of Dazai Shundai, but later changed the school to which he belonged. Finally, Wada Tesunojo was a Confucian scholar of the Bizen Okayama domain and served as tutor to the heir to the domain at that time. Particularly noteworthy in table 1 is the fact that Shunsui interacted with Confucian scholars of other domains, such as Wada Tesunojo and Akazaki Gensuke during the period. In the section about Wada Tesunojo in Shiyushi, he wrote, at that time, all the heirs of the Bizen domain, Satsuma domain, and our domain were of the same age. This suggests that the social network he had during the period of his service in Edo in the Tenmei era was started with those playing the same role as heir tutors. Reading the Confucian classics together was certainly not the only point of contact with his peers. In the diary are a number of mentions of work gakudan discussion talk, suggesting that Shunsui was visited by his fellows to have scholarly conversations. Furthermore, on separate occasions, Shunsui's fellows visited Shunsui to read Confucian classics together. While the contents of Edozume Hikae are primarily about tutoring the heir Asano Narikata, Shunsui's diary states his activities in Edo, including social relations and reading matters related to the tutoring of the heir, and the descriptions concerning reading Confucian classics are part of such social relations. Currently, it is somewhat difficult to make clear statements about Shunsui's reading interest based solely on searches of the aforementioned Confucian classics and Chinese books. However, this talk confirms that Shunsui's reading was linked with his activities in Edo and Hiroshima. In the future, once all diary entries are entered, we might be able to see changes in Shunsui's activities and unveil further details of Shunsui's social networks. In the years after the Tenmei era, Shunsui played an active role in the movement towards the prohibition of heterodoxy. That took place in the Kansai era. Use of the JBDB will thus provide a new perspective on the interactions Shunsui has with fellow Confucian scholars in Edo, including the three great scholars and the way in which Shunsui's social networks were established. I would like to conclude my presentation. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you so much. Wonderful. So hopefully you have all seen how really our symposium follows a red thread. Here we have seen how Takahashi Sensei has combined some of the topics that Asai Sensei has put out about the job of a scholar of a domain school who has to teach. Now together with also what we have just learned by Shimizu Sensei about the scholarly networks that are manifold, and we encountered all this through a close reading of texts that these scholars shared in reading together. Okay, so we are entering now our Q&A session. And as I said before, please write your questions into the chat, either in Japanese or in English. And our speakers will, of course, then reply directly to you. So please don't be shy. Ask again your questions. I'm very sure there are many questions that you have in regard to these presentations. If also another question came up for the first two speakers, please add them as well. Anyone? The presentations answered everything to you. There are no remaining questions. I mean, that would be wonderful, of course. Yes, there is, of course. Yes, so you may ask your question for the previous presentation. Yes, go ahead. Okay, so this question here again is from Motomura sensei. Are you here? Yes, good. Okay. Okay, but you are muted, so please, the questions, as you all can see.
喪に服するって何をするんですかって？
Confucian, like Ito-Shinzo. Okay, oh, 3 years. Okay.
武士たちのやつはちょっと私も武器例とか読んでないんで何をどうのっていうのはねちょっと今すぐ即答はできないですけど、儒学者だったら儒学の例の規定に沿ってるものでやるんだろうと思いますけどそうですね、即答はちょっとすいませんね、具体的に何というにはねちょっと今答えられませんが。
So you all can see the question, and then the answer was, well, you know, it's easier to say for purely Confucian scholars who are not also samurai, as in case of Shunsui, because if these Confucian scholars were really adhering to the Chinese texts that prescribes the way of mourning that starts with certain types of garments that have to be provided and certain rituals that start in the morning and goes on for a certain period of time, depending on how close you were in line to the person who deceased. In Shunsui's case, as Motomura sensei pointed out, it is particular because even though he considers himself as a Confucian scholar, trying actually to practice and live according to Neo-Confucian ideas and ideals, he was also at the same time employed by the Hiroshima domain and thereby has samurai status. So for him, he has, as Asai sensei has shown, he has to show up in school to teach around a certain schedule. So even though mourning, of course, for a certain time, according to the samurai laws for mourning, allows for times to take off from your public appearances, it's a little bit more difficult instead of those scholars like perhaps Ito Jinsai, who had his own private school and was thereby not employed directly, if I recall it correctly. So yes, mourning, of course, is very interesting. It's one of these things that I'm also quite interested in rituals, Confucian rituals, and the implementation of them in the Tokugawa context. And of course, early Tokugawa, mid Tokugawa, late Tokugawa are quite different in that regard, because as you have learned also from Shimizu sensei's presentation, that the ways how scholars even considered themselves to be categorized or not changed drastically during the Tokugawa period. and it's not all the same. Thank you. Maybe anything you would like to add, Motomura sensei? Anything to add?
はい。
追加に何か。
いえいえいえ、大丈夫。すいません、模に複す方はね、ちょっとっていうより、僕は今、死に至るまでの間の方にすごく、注意していて、そういう点から見て、さっきも言ったんですけど、春水とか儒者の方は多分、模に複す方にね、すごくウェイトが置いてあるっていうことが今回もわかるので、ちょっと武士とか侍とかと、その春水たちの儒学者がね、何をやってたかっていうのがどうだっていうのはね、ちょっとこれから調べなきゃいけないんですけど、それも研究あると思うので、ちょっと今後これからそれもやっていきたいと思います。
Yeah. Always good to have new ideas about what else to include. Are there any other questions or comments? Okay, so who is going to answer the question? May I ask to clarify when ended the education for Asano Narikata? Anyone of our 4 speakers so far? Who has worked mainly on that? Tutoring. Either Takahashi.
これで僕ですかね。いつでしたっけいや、すいません。そこまで調べてなかったですね。天明年間はずっとやってるというのは知ってるんですが、そうですね。すみません。ちょっとすぐ出てこないですね。元服してるのが1789なので、おそらくその頃までなんじゃないかなとは思うんですけど、確証はないです。1789。
Yes, I mean, I think the diary gives various indications about the stages. I don't really recall now whether he mentioned, okay, now it's over. But there are other records, and I assume it's in the Hiroshima Kenshi, in one of the Kinsei, that you would find more information exactly just about the education and also the details that I think in Dai Shunsui's records, we have drawings of where he would sit when he was lecturing to the heir adherent, and also, if I recall correctly, sometimes in the diary, the lectures were canceled because the student was not too eager to study on that day. And so, I mean, there were all kinds of things also for Shunsui. It's really interesting to read that diary, to see closely how he tries to teach this boy, and more or less successfully or not, by reading the daily entries in the records of Shunsui. But yes, there is research out there, I think. Either is it maybe like Stomu Sensei maybe has an article out, maybe in Hiroshima. Maybe Asai Sensei knows about that, because I mean, she has always worked on kyoiku, right, on the educational part.
もう確証がないので発言しませんでした。ので、ずっといつまでっていうのがパッと出てこないです。
部屋に戻るとあるんですけどね。
すいません。
But thank you for the great question. Yes, because it is of course interesting to see, and it would be also interesting to make a comparison to what Takahashi Sensei introduced, the other tutors of other domains, and to see, you know, how old was the heir when the education started, and when did it stop, and whether it depended really on age, or it depended on other circumstances of availability of a tutor being present in Edo to teach. Thank you. Are there any other comments?
あと、さっきの復帰例なんですけど、なんか、その魚とか肉を食べなかったりとか、あとなんか髪の毛を剃らなかったりとか、なんか神社に行かないみたいなことじゃないかなと。それもちゃんと、研究してみないとわかんないですけど、まあ、そういった、内容が含まれているというのは何かの研究で、はい、見たことがあります。
Yes, there is this very thick book about mourning in the Tokugawa period, and I just do not recall the name of that female scholar. I do not recall her name, but she has written about it. And as Asai Sensei just mentioned, you know, during mourning, you shouldn't eat meat, fish, you should not go out to visit a shrine. So there are certain things of abstinence that you would partake. And I think in the diary, a closer reading does indicate some of the things that Shunsui at least did not do, because he would say in the diary, because of mourning, he does not do this and that. So we get more indication, but there is this really interesting book about the Tokugawa, the various prescriptions about mourning and at all levels of society that she investigated, but I cannot recall the name. It's in my office. Okay, any other questions or comments? If not, then maybe we take again a 10-minute break and we resume again at 3:20. This is when we will resume. Is that okay? 10 minutes? Yes. Okay, thank you. And I will stop the recording now. I'll pause it. Which one is the pause button? Okay, so see you all. I'll figure that out. You now the recording. So again, thank you now for the last leg of our symposium. 2 more presentations if Leoborn is also here. This also sort of explains much of what you have seen so far. And I will actually go over to my desktop because that is just easier. Okay, now you can see everything, I hope. It's fine because I have to switch back and forth. So let me begin right away with my little talk. So this little presentation here of mine really should give you an idea of what is possible today in digital humanities, and also how it relates to all the papers that you have heard so far, because they all, of course, deal in some way or the other with Rai Shunsui or his wife Rai Shizu and her family, and also their friends. And as part, my contribution to this research project is basically my continuous work on that family, in which I have been interested in now for many, many years, almost 10 years now, but also to help to provide the database for it. I'm certainly not the person who is programming the database. I'm also not the one who is feeding the database. For that, there is a wonderful team. And today, I think Asano-san is also here with us. So maybe later he can say something about the feeding of the database as well. He's been with the project already for 10 years, I think. So I'm just reporting basically what is going on. So what kind of sources are we using for this Japan biographical database, and in particular for my project that caters around that entire family of the Rai from Hiroshima and Osaka, And we are using mainly diaries and letters that are available in print edition. The next step then will be to integrate also sources that are not printed yet. But for our first step, everything that is printed is plenty of work, definitely for us. Rai family, of course, is famous for everyone who is interested in Tokugawa history or Meiji history for that matter too, because of Rai Sanyo. And so since that family is even until today an academic family, the records are well preserved. And now there's even a wonderful catalog that I don't have time to show to you. Anyway, about all the available documents in the archives of that family. So we are using these materials to feed the database. And so as many of my presenters ahead of me already have pointed out, they have been reading the diary by Rai Shunsui. I also make lots of use of Rai Shizu's diary called Baishi Nikki because I'm also interested in gender studies. But for today, let me really just focus on Shunsui in my presentation. As you see, it's a couple that is keeping diaries at the same time. There's many of years are overlapping, as you can see, and that makes it also so particular and so special in doing the research, and of course the many letters that are available. So what do we do? So we have to feed, of course, the database. The database is only as good as the material that we feed, and if you haven't fed any of the data, then you will not get any results from the database. So that is just how it is. So please do not assume that when you go to the database, you can find all the data that you would like to see before you have to input the data in order to get the results. But what we have been doing for this academic year so far is really going line by line of both diaries, the Baishi Nikki as well as the Shunsui Nikki, and processing it. If there's an event or any type of other meeting that we know of, it is going to be logged in. The reason for this decision is that our database is supposed to visualize the relationships amongst people. So it is a relational database, meaning how are these people connected? And these connections we express by entering data about their meetings, their correspondence, exchanges of gifts, persons, whatever it is. So that is the link, and that is what we can visualize. We also have prosopography in our database made available. But for today, let me just really focus on the social network analysis and that relational database part. And actually from now on, let me go straight over to the database, and let's also hope that the internet is stable. So if you go to the database, and I hope you can see that, it's a very simple URL, jbdb.jp. You can choose the language, either English or Japanese. Please keep that in mind. It is a bilingual database, so it should be convenient for you. We go in and explore it right away so that and I'm not logged in with a special account. So you should be able to see exactly the same, but please do not do so now because we want to make sure that I can show you all the visualizations without you interfering in between. It should be no problem, but we just want to make sure that there are no hiccups. So each person gets an ID card, just like anyone who has a credit card, and your card would also be stored with your data in a database. So we have here various things. One of the nice things here is, which of course many scholars always have trouble with, is the conversion from the old calendar to the modern calendar. And we have a tool integrated that helps us. Months and days, we always leave in the lunar calendar. We do not convert them because it would be odd to us. Those who do Japanese studies in English, they are familiar with this type of hybrid conversion, which seems really to work best. Anyway, so here are our main data. You can find out about the personal history. This is rather new, and we still have to develop it further about Dai Shunsui. You can find out his relationships amongst his kin. He's the uncle of, grandfather of, and so forth. You have all these people entered that so far have come up. And of course, something that today, like Shimizu Sensei has also pointed out, these non-kinship relationships amongst other scholars. And Takahashi Sensei too, he mentioned, for instance, Hayashi Risai today a couple of times. So he would be here, and in other people as well. Then you see associated events that makes the social network analysis possible. We have here, obviously, lots of meetings, 6,143 meetings are already logged. And we have the rest of those 7,587 are letters, correspondence mainly, maybe also once in a while a gift or an exchange of goods, right? So you see, we have really lots of data about each person. If you ever need help, here on the top, you have a user guide that you can use. So please keep this in mind. But let's go over to the visualization so that we can see how does it actually work? How can we do all these wonderful things that others have been talked about? For instance, let us just use only the Shunsui Nikki and then go about all his meetings and exchanges as ones. Gender, let's add that because it's fun. Add a time slider and limit everything just to this one source. Only what we have learned from the Shunsui Nikki so far. So please keep also in mind while this is loading, the Shunsui Nikki is a record written by Shunsui, and he only recorded what he thought is important. So I'm not showing you now a reality of what actually happened, but something through the eyes of Shunsui, what he thought was important. Adding more data from other people, letters, other diaries, will give us a fuller picture, not only of what he deemed to be important. That is a point that I will come back to later on. So here our Shunsui is in the center, and here you see he has a huge network. Now let's see how it develops, because he did not start up in his diary with so many people. So we go to the beginning when he started his recordings in his diary in 1781, and slowly but surely he mentions people in the diary that he is connected to. Some of them are more intensive, and I did not select that, but you have actually the chance to select the intensivity between people. And if you would like to, you can also see, so who, for instance, is this person? Shunsui is our center, obviously, right? Here we have him. Then let's see, who is this person he is connected to. Then we get all the connections that this Watanabe Gensuke has, right? So we see lots of things. So these are the nodes, as we call them. And these connections, these edges, are, for instance, created by meetings, right? So we can do all these things together. So let's not do the animation. You have seen how it sort of works. Let's go and do not the animation. So let me actually go quickly back to show you a few other things. Let's take out the time slider. You have seen, you can see the developments over time. Later, I show you something over space as well. But now let's go to a little bit more of the full fledged network of Shunsui right away, sort of. It just takes a little bit time because Shunsui is our main person. And of course, he has the most connections. So you see here actually purple bubbles and green bubbles. The reason is that I chose gender as a division. So let us analyze a little bit his group of people he mentions in his diary. And here we see that 815 are men that he mentions, and only 6 of them are women, which is interesting, right? Now let's look by Mibun or status, the division. And we see, of course, the majority of the people that are mentioned in the diary, we just don't know enough about them yet. Hopefully in the future, we will be able to enter more information. But we have here higher ranking warriors, 13 of them are mentioned, 190 retainers, which makes sense because the diary, as also Motomura sensei and everyone else has shown, it is Shunsui becoming a samurai and then of course having all these dealings with samurai from then on. But we also have villagers and we have others. If we look at occupation, because we know that Mibun or status alone is a weird category only to go by, we also see that many of them were scholars and also physicians, and we have merchants. We also have a couple of writers here, very thin. Yes, so we do have a distribution that we can show. Let's look at events. So overall, we have logged here for this time, only from the diary, we selected the diary only, 4,899 meetings and 835 exchanges. So that is really a lot. He was a record keeper. If we want to go more into detail, we can even see, well, what kind of meetings were that? And that comes out in the research that we have seen from Takahashi sensei today, where he mentioned, you know, what kind of meetings they were reading texts together, or Asai sensei, who mentioned, well, he is working and teaching, but what was the content of the teaching? Was he lecturing? Was he tutoring? You know, what is it? Or social meetings, giving and looking for advice. We often actually have that in Shunsu's case in the beginning, these naidan or nai-naidan sometimes too. But also here, lectures, right? He was giving lectures, academic discussions, right? Or talks where he meets with others, and social meetings, which are a little bit more formal. So you see that the team feeding the database really need to understand the sources in order to make these judgments. So we can do all kinds of things with this database, of course, and I only have so much time. So one of the other things that I would like to show to you is maybe the non-kinship relationships that we learn about through the diary. So here, not including everything that we know, but mainly what Shunsui decided to record. I actually have never created this one, so we'll see if that actually works or whether we get in trouble. And I do have to, there it is. Okay, so we have 422 people are mentioned and 542 relations are expressed. You can, of course, go and make it smaller. And you have all their names. And as I said, I'm in the English mode, but you can also do the Japanese mode. We have them in various layers. You can see the relationship by looking at that, you know, like here, who is the teacher of whom? So Chō Tōsai would be the teacher of Rai Shunsui, and so forth. You can select a person, and why we don't, for instance, look for Kenkado, because, you know, we all sort of know Kimura Kenkado, and he is, of course, in our path. He is on our graph, and we can try to find the shortest path between him, okay, and Shunsui. Yeah, find. if you want to know, so how close are they actually, right? Because it could be that you have in your network now not a direct acquaintance, but a friend of a friend or a teacher of a teacher, as for instance, Shimizu sensei showed today about Ino-oka Gisai, that his teacher was the student of someone, and that's why Gisai is often considered to be in the beginning someone who belonged to the Asai school. But here we can see how direct is it actually according to our mention in the database. So here we see how Shunsui and Kenkado are considered to be of equal standing, friends or acquaintances, and so forth. So this is a fun way of how to play with the database. An additional thing that I would like to show you today is something that plays an important role in what Takahashi sensei and also Motomura sensei has indicated. It's place, location, and actually also Shimizu sensei too. Location matters. So for whatever you do. So from our diary, Shunsui Nikki again, we see that Shunsui was not always in Hiroshima, but he moved around. And we see him, of course, for an extensive time in Edo, residing, tutoring first the heir apparent, but also just spending time there on duty. In Osaka, of course, he spends lots of time because he still has friends and also indirect family over there. And of course, here is then indicated Takehara as well. We could do, of course, the animation, but it would take too much of our time. So let us maybe just close in a little bit into our map to show what happened, for instance, when he went to Takehara, as has been pointed out by Motomura sensei. So here in our GIS mode, we also can see exactly, okay, this is the place, and then what happened. And here we see the father of Shunsui is mentioned, 1782. And there are various things that we can probably also identify more closely in these various things, how they are mentioned, where they are logged. Here, Shunsui is visiting Takehara and actually here then staying obviously for more than one day. He is moving over. We find him also in Osaka. Ooh, this is really small. Okay. Yes, so we know even probably, but that's Setsunokuni. Okay, some of the data we have to see how that actually works out. But if you go to, and I will close very soon with that, let's really go in because I have already my 20 minutes, keeping time myself. I mean, Edo, of course, is 7,417 times mentioned in the diary as a place of location. If I would like to load that now, we would get a beautiful bubble and I could just do that for fun. But of course, you know, it would take up here a little bit too much time. Yeah, that it just, you have either to wait or whatever it is. So let's just not do this for now, but I hope you sort of got a good idea of what the database is capable of. Usually I give a talk that takes like an hour to introduce the database. Today I stay only with 20 minutes. One of the things that in addition maybe I may point out is, again, the diary does not reflect a certain historical reality. It is only the records that we have. And from that we create a social network, and we have, of course, to trust the records that we have. One thing that we need to keep in mind is that Shunsui, we have seen, he mentioned only 6 women versus so many men in his diary in the same time when Shizu entered names in her diary, so parallel, and we see that she mentioned many more women. Now, there are two options to explain that. One is that Shimizu simply met more women, or, which is probably more likely, she wrote down their names versus Shunsui just didn't bother to. He tries to talk to men about his job, and women seems not to feature. Shimizu, she also writes about men. She writes about Shunsui. Everything is about him in her diary, him and his life. But she also does not fail to mention at least a few women, right? Because if we consider, the many meetings and correspondence that they have, of course, he has many more meetings than she does in the same time period. We see she was still very active, in particular when it comes to gift giving and writing letters. So this is one of the things that we really need to remember, that when looking at these two diaries. One more point I would like to make before I end my little explanation here is, if you look at the events where Shimizu calls out for her husband, where he is mentioned, she mentions him much more often than actually Shunsui mentions Shimizu, even though both of them were at the same place at the same time, as we can assume, but he just did not bother to mention that. So the gender aspect, of course, is quite important when we are using these materials, and I really thank you very much for listening, and please visit our wonderful database whenever you have time to. This is a former student who was drawing this beautiful little spider. Anyway, thank you very much. And I guess I am at this point then done with my presentation. Okay, and we hopefully, yes, Leo Born is here, who will give now the final words and discussion, going now even more into the future of our database and what will be. The presentation will be short, and afterwards we will have our Q&A and final discussion for today's symposium. Okay, so please, Leo Born, it's all yours.
Thank you very much. And thank you for the opportunity to speak here. Let me just briefly start sharing my screen. So just a brief introduction to myself. My name is Leo Born, and I am the principal administrator and technician behind the JBDB since 2016. And today I would like to use this short presentation to talk about the near to midterm future of the Japan Biographical Database. Now, as we have just seen, the JBDB at its core is data-driven, which means that as a data-driven project, the more data we have, the more we can benefit in various regards. 2 points that will especially benefit from more data, on which I would like to focus this presentation today, is one, the integration of different and more research projects, and two, the enhancement of the geographical visualization component, which we just saw briefly as well. The effects of which we hope to achieve with that are for respectively the first point, that we can achieve a more explorative and analytic range for the network visualizations. I will come back to that in a moment. And for the second point, for the GIS component, what we hope to achieve is to be able to track so-called biographical itineraries. So we could compare individuals' movements across space and time as well. And how that contrasts to what we have now is another point I will talk about shortly on. So first, to the first point, the projects. Actually, currently the JBDB already contains certain sub-projects, but as we have, of course, seen, the core network revolves around Shunsui. But if we move away from sort of the Shunsui-centric sources, as we have seen now, and just for a moment look at the full network, we can see that there are other distinct networks within the JBDB already, although they have not been explicitly labeled as belonging to different projects at the moment. So these were mostly networks input in the context of seminars at Sophia University. And for the sake of labeling, they belong to the core project JBDB. So as I said, if we look at the full visualization of the Japan Biographical Database, we can see multiple connected components. So as you can probably guess, the big network in the center is the one revolving around Shunsui here. But we can also see that there are other distinct interconnected networks, for example, at the top here, or especially at the bottom here, some of which have certain connections to the overarching larger network, but also some of which are closed off and isolated. So these are very explicitly networks in and of themselves that have nothing to do with Shunsui. But as I said, these were more an incidental side effect of data input, because at the time when we conducted the seminars, we didn't have a clear idea of separating projects more explicitly. However, that changed this year. So apart from the default or core JBDB project, we conducted one pilot project this year in cooperation with Frankfurt University, which consisted of preparing a data set consisting of Japanese students in Germany during the Meiji era for inclusion in the Japan Biographical Database. Now, based on this experience, which went really well, we strive towards integrating other projects as well in the future. Because what that data gave us was a lot of biographical data, in the sense that we now have more names and more very broad points of biographical information on people. But however, we do not have any relational data from that data set, meaning that if we were to visualize that data set, we would get a lot of unconnected nodes. So these are 2,500 people of whom we have some information, but none that is interactional in kind. So in the future going forward, if we get the chance to integrate other research projects as well, it would of course be very interesting and very valuable for the ensuing visualizations to have more relational data as well, because this could allow us to draw further connections between historical figures, and consequently enable a wider explorative and analytic range for the visualization component. As Professor Oka has shown, we do not have that many, we do have many visualization capabilities. However, due to time constraints, we couldn't show all of them, but there are much more ways in which you can analyze a network. So having this mature framework for network visualization and analysis, we just hope having more relational data would then further enable other researchers or students to come across interesting findings between various networks or comparing two distinct networks, as we've just seen with Shimizu and Shunsui's networks. Now, this is the first point. The second point, as I mentioned, concerns the geographical component, so the GIS component. As we have briefly seen, currently what the component does is it enables us to basically display where people met, therefore identifying important places over time and over different sources or data sets. The example just given was the Shunsui Nikki, so we could see which places for the Shunsui Nikki and therefore for Shunsui himself were of importance and how that developed over time. However, another interesting application for GIS that comes to mind is being able to use individual location information as well. By that, I mean, currently, all the data you have seen on the map is necessitated by meetings or events, generally speaking, which means that at least two people have to be related for it to show on the map. But of course, individuals moved across Japan without specifically meeting other people as well, or without recording that they went somewhere to and met somebody there. So what would be very interesting is to see how an individual moved across space and time as well. And actually, we currently already do feed in that individual information as well. So when somebody moved someplace because their occupation changed, moved someplace because of their marriage or whatever, we do have that information, but it is at the moment not considered yet for the GIS visualizations. So we would like to change that and thus be able to what we call biographical itineraries of individuals. To show you just how that might look, I would like to give you a contrast to how it currently looks. I mean, this is basically the view we just have seen. I would just focus in on a detailed view at this stage here. So as you can see, this cluster of 3 people here on the bottom left indicates that there was an event between these 3 people at that place. Now, that is the sole reason we can show each one of those 3 people on the map for this spot and this time. However, these people, as I mentioned, of course, also moved around Japan without meeting other people and or without meeting these specific people as well. So biographical itineraries would then enable us to select one person or maybe multiple persons, and then be able to accurately, as possible, show where they were at what point doing what that was not related to any event, so not necessarily related to meeting other people. Now, since we do not have that functionality yet, but we strive towards doing that within the next year, I would just try to illustrate that by using this screenshot. This comes from a other project from a publication of mine from a couple of years ago, where we tracked the movements of European emperors and kings across space and time. And basically that sort of framework or mindset would be then applied to the JBDB, so that we could be able to select one person and then have at each stop basically a pin on the map showing when that person was there and for what purpose. Now, all in all, that means gathering more data in the case of more projects and doing more with the data we already have for the GIS components. So our hope is that we will be able to extend the database and the ways that we can utilize that data. And as I said, the near-term goal is to be able to show these biographic itineraries within the next year, if possible. Now, doing so would then enable us to also compare biographies of different people across time and space more intuitively than currently. So if you are interested in, well, just the 2 biographies of 2 distinct people, you either go via the larger networks that might ensue using the network visualization component, or you go in a tabular view, since you can always compare the data sheets of individuals with each other, but adding in geographical comparison layer would also probably help in determining how their movements differed, for example. So just to give you a very different research example from the paper from 2 years ago, that enabled us to clearly differentiate between emperors, for example, who were very local compared to others who were more inclined in not just strengthening their empire, but also expanding it, which of course resulted in them visiting more places more frequently, and also those places were much farther apart than for kings or emperors whose reach was much, much more local. Now, these were just very brief glimpses into the future of the JBDB, but I hope that these enhancements, when they will come due, will be of use to many people, and that US researchers will also be able to get interesting insights and or visualizations out of them. And for everything that is to come, the nearer term goals are within the next year. And of course, beyond that, we also hope to further enhance the database and be able to draw on much stronger information than we currently have. And that is it for me for the future of the JBDB. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Wonderful how you, so I look forward to the future because, of course, 10 years ago, when we sort of started thinking about this JBDB that had still a different name and a different programmer, I saw already little turtles walking on maps, and that will, the biographical itineraries then will bring it closer to my initial dream that I had about how to visualize networks. So that is all for today, but maybe let me also quickly introduce, before we start our general discussion, Asano-san, could you just say hello because you are here? He is an important team member, as I mentioned. He's the team leader, basically. Would you mind just saying a couple of words?
Okay, can I hear my voice?
Yes, yes, yes.
Yes. Well, I'll talk in Japanese, so yes. ちょっと日本語で失礼させていただきます。この JBDB の、チームメンバーを務めております、浅野と申します。私の方からということで、結構急遽ちょっとお話を振っていただいたので、何を言おうかなと思ったんですけど、ちょっと今回お伺いしてた先生方の報告と、あとこれからの質疑っていうのにちょっと結びつけてお話をしようかなと思ってます。で、今回ご報告いただいた先生方の、それぞれのご発表からかなり、いろいろ示唆をいただいたところがありまして、というのも、これまでちょっと私自身は、先ほどデータベースの紹介をされたボルンさんとは違って、ひたすら春水日記とか買収日記のデータ、日記のデータというふうなものを入力していくというふうなことをしていたんですけれども、やっぱりそれをただ入力するっていうふうなことの中でも結構いくつか壁に当たったところがありまして、というのも最初に浅井先生と、あとその後最後の報告の山口先生ですかね、の報告の、いただいたところの、いわゆる春水が教えているレクチャーの、種別であるとか、あとはそのルーティーンと、それから主体っていうふうなものを、結構日記の中から、比較的細かく捉えるっていうのが、明確にできるところとできないところが結構あってですね、それを見ていくと、例えば先ほど、ご発表の中で、なり方に対する、レクチャーっていうふうなものが出てきましたけれども、なり方と、重明が一緒にいる時系列っていうのがあって、それが完成、確か3年だったかな、3年だったと思うんですけれども、その時とかは、結構なり方じゃなくて、その江戸に、 江戸に来ていた、重明も、その春水に対して学問的なことに関する質問とか読書を請うているっていうふうなことが分かっているところなので、なんかそういうところを見ていくと、結構やっぱりなり方と、重明、それぞれに、いろいろ教えているっていうふうなところもあるんですけど、それをなんか明確になんか見る手段としては、もしかすると原本に帰らなくちゃいけないのかなと思うところもあって、っていうのも、そこで出てくる重明に対する敬意表現とかって、漢本とかだと、メサルとかっていうふうな、メス、召喚の章ってやつですね。あれとかを使って血字をつけて、表現してるっていうふうなのがあるんですけれども、ちょっと何回か原本とか見てると、おそらく漢本の方だと多分その血字プラス、あと対等とか、いわゆる行を変えて敬意表現をやるってやつですけれども、それが、必ずしも表現されきっていないところもあるので、そことかはちょっと適宜原本に帰りながら、見ていくことで、もしかすると、その春水の江戸での滞在とかにおける、やり方に対する考説とかと、あとは、重明に対する重明とのやり取りっていうふうなのを、なんかもしかすると分かりやすく分けることもできるのかなっていうふうに思っていて、そのあたりとかはやはり、先ほどの、レクチャーの種類とかとも合わせて考えなくちゃいけないところかなと思いました。で、ちょっと、そうですね、あと他の、大丈夫ですか、時間。で、ちょっとですね。
あんまりないです。はい、少し
はい、
もちろん。
ごめんなさい。は
はい
い。あと他にも、いくつか春水の関わる人物として、井岡義祭関連のご報告もいただきましたけれども、やはり春水の、比較的足取りとして、かなり江戸に行く途中とかに大阪に寄ったりとかして、もちろん海徳堂の関係者であるとか、あとは義祭の近親者とかに、会ってっていうふうなことも、春水日記から見えてくるので、そういったところの、いわゆる大阪関連の人物というふうなところについても、今後もう少し、きちんと追っていかなければいけないのかなと思いました。で、それではどういうふうに細かく入れていくかっていうのは、ちょっと今後、入力する側でちょっといろいろ考えなければいけないので、ちょっと、皆様からいただいた、ご報告をちょっともとに、こちらの入力者側としても、今後入力する内容であるとか、あとは入力する際の、カテゴリーの分け方とかっていうふうなものをちょっとずつ、再考できればなと思っています。なんかすいません、まとまらない話になっちゃったんですけれども、以上です。
Thank you very much for giving us a very good insight into what is actually going on. And just to repeat it once in English, one of the things that Asano-san pointed out is that by feeding the database with the print version of the diary, we have to keep in mind that maybe there are some typos or there are some shortcuts, that it would be, of course, best to look at the original, at the handwritten manuscript of the diary to make sure that there are no mistakes. Also, what is of course necessary, and that goes back to the original of this entire idea of visualization. The visualization and the database can only be as good as your data are, as I said in the beginning. And it is also important, of course, that you have to have someone with knowledge of the time and the materials in order to, at least try to erase as many mistakes as possible and to find new leeways. To me, the database is not becoming the ultimate. It's just a tool. It's a tool that helps us to go through this huge amount of records that are available. But in order to really make statements or to forge a good argument, we always will have to go back to the sources to double check, to see if this is actually correct, the data that we have here. But it gives us new ideas. And that is really what happened to me during this process of being part with the team to think about the database and what is possible. I came up with new questions, with new perspectives on my materials that I did not have prior. I was very text-based, a very typical historian. You have a text, you analyze it, and then that's it. But with this kind of endeavor to come up with, all right, how would I do that? What kind of categories are important? And you just start thinking in different dimensions as well. First of all, 3D, hopefully in the future, but it just opens up new things. But you should not assume that the database is by default completely correct. That is not, I mean, we try, of course, to be as good, but there's constant fixing and adding material, changing the stuff when we notice, oh, I read something somewhere else, there seems to be a typo and so forth. So thank you very much, Asano-san, also for introducing, to everyone what happens in the background of the database, that really hard labor. Right now, we have a team of 4 members who are feeding the database, and they work really hard. Okay, so we do have questions, and maybe all the speakers could actually come and show their faces. All the speakers and presenters, please turn your video on, and we go into our final discussion. So we have here 1, 2, 3 questions. Okay, Leo, one question is for you. Let's go one after the other.
Yeah, sure. So thank you very much, Yamamoto Sensei, for that question. We thought about the use of AI to extend the data or to manually input the data as well. Currently, there are 2 big roadblocks, so depending on in which context you want to use AI. So the first is how can we use or digitize the Nikki text, for example, or use digitized versions of them and extract data from them. That is, of course, very dependent on how accurate OCR becomes, especially for historic texts. Currently, and we tried that a couple of times, but currently it is not accurate enough for our standards in a way to be able to extract or correctly digitize the text. Now, that pipeline then depends on another step that is also problematic at the moment, which would be to automatically extract the information from digitized text. For that, we have to make use of NLP-based methods. Coming from an NLP background, I have a master's in computational linguistics. I've also, of course, tried to use some methods in being able to extract these information from the text. However, given the nature and the very difference to how modern Japanese is written, and seeing as many tools are written for modern Japanese, it is also not, at least in the nearer future, for us possible to automatically extract all the information that we want to have in the JBDB from such text in an automated way. So it would be nice. It will be possible in some future. I just don't want to say how far that future will be out. But yeah, it's a very interesting thought, of course. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you. I might also add, I was listening last week, I think, to Tarin's presentation about Mivo and, text really understanding the casuistry into modern print, and it looks we are going bigger steps, even though she would always explain to the scholars who were listening, because they don't like the idea too much, I think, that, oh, we still have to look at the original text. It's only 90% or 95% correct, and I think 95% sounds good to me. But anyways, there are, of course, those who are, but things are going so fast now. I mean, in the last 2 years during COVID, all the things that have been digitized and things that you can play with this Mivo application, I mean, it is wonderful. So hopefully in the future, maybe with the help of the Kokubunken, we will be able to achieve something like that, Yamamoto Sensei, and we will see where that goes. Okay, and then there is a question for me about maps, GIS. Yes, I actually thank you very much for the question about the GIS. And I was attending last week also another talk about Kyoto and how to do historical maps onto GIS. And unfortunately, I could not do it myself. The beta version from, it's the Ritsume-kan, right? It's what's Yano Sensei, maybe is his name, who has been working on that project already for 10, 12 years. They were able to do various layers, Heian period and Tokugawa period and modern Kyoto. So therefore Kyoto, it seems a little bit easier. I'm not quite sure where they are right now with Edo and the historical maps. And as long as no one really, works on these maps and prepares them for Hiroshima, for the city, I'm not so quite sure. But again, this is something that I hope in the future will be possible. And I think, Leo Born, you have already looked into that quite a bit. So we do use, of course, a modern map underneath, because at this point, that was like the next step to go. But maybe, Leo, you want to add something about these historical maps and GIS?
Yes, exactly. So also in cooperation with Frankfurt University, we looked at aligning an Edo map for purposes similar to this. But the problem with using historical maps, apart from the labor of course, manually aligning those to what we have in the background, which is modern coordinates, to be able to see, okay, on a map, where is Osaka now, for example. You would need to, of course, then align a map of Japan, for example, to match that the coordinates of Osaka are in the place of Osaka on the historical map. But you'd also have to do that for not every intermediate layer, but at some point, if you move in close enough, you would then need, again, separate maps for separate cities. So seeing that we are geographically not focused on a very distinct area in Japan, so for example, just Kyoto, and this just Kyoto is by no means to diminish the work of Ritsume-kan, but seeing that our people can be everywhere possibly, we would need to account for historical maps, not just of the whole of Japan at some point in the past. And that is another point. So which point in the past do we choose? Because some people were in Edo in 1620, other people were there in 1850. We would then also need to have different historical maps of singular places for multiple periods of time, which is a huge resource bounding task, since we would have to gather the maps in the first place. We would have to have the permission to use those maps. We would then need to have to align every single map of that to the modern GIS systems with the coordinates. And then we would be at a stage to be able to use the points that we have now and have historical maps underground. Which is very, of course, very appealing, but very, very labor intensive. So maybe if the team extends in the future, we might be able to do that. Currently, it is unfortunately not a slated feature for at least the near term future.
Yes, our goals are definitely to reach out to many more institutes where they do all the research. And hopefully to be reaching out. The next question, I think, is also from Jajeng, actually is also for Leo Born, maybe, right? Because this talks more about your map and the biographical itinerary. Will we be able to do that, which would be, of course, wonderful, like the story maps that we know from other projects where they have them?
Yes, certainly. So as I mentioned, the current part is only concerned with the interactions between people. So seeing that we have events already in the database, those are what we show on the map. The next step, as I showed, would be the singular biographical itinerary. So selecting one person and then just showing, okay, where did that one person go? Of course, the ideal scenario would then be to be able to connect those two modes of presentation. So you select one person, see where that person went over the time, but then be also able to additionally show, okay, at that point, that person was there, and that person had interactions with these 5 different people, for example, based on events, so and so and so and so in the database. So that is certainly within possibility after we have completed the first isolated round of individuals' itineraries on the map.
Thank you. Are there any other further questions or comments by anyone? You're all sort of exhausted, probably. Well, it was wonderful though. Well, in that case, maybe we are going really just to slowly end our session. I should thank again, which I probably forgot, we should thank the Institute of Comparative Culture at Sophia University for hosting and supporting our symposium. And of course, our Kakenhi project has been, the grant behind it has been funding our research here. And I should also, of course, thank again that we were able to do that. It is a joy to work as a team. Today, many team members are here coming together to present what we have been doing. Our team has presented in the past in Beijing, and this time it's here online on Zoom. So we will see where our next presentation will be, maybe again in 3 years. Yes, so we will see what kind of location, and what we will also be able to find out more about the Tokugawa period and intellectual history, and also educational history and so forth. So maybe Shimizu Sensei wants to say something at the end as our project leader. And you may do so also in Japanese, of course.
はい。今日は長い時間どうもありがとうございました。慣れないところも多かったろうと思いますし、英語ということで、私たち、あまり得意ではない方が、多いとは思うんですけれども、その点では、岡先生にものすごくたくさん助けてもらいます。その辺も、本当にありがとうございます。で、私たちのプロジェクト、最初にご紹介した通り、1つ目のプロジェクトが終わって、今こちらが2つ目ということになっています。で、こちらはもう間もなく終わるということになるわけですけれども、もし、うまくですね、採択されれば第3期があるということになります。その暁は、どこでやるんでしょうね。私にも全く予想がつきませんし、ちょっとコロナもね、ありますので、世界の情勢とも相談というか、様子を見ながらということにはなると思いますが、何かしらの形でまた、ぜひ、研究成果をお届けする機会を持てればというふうに思っています。その際にはですね、また何らかの形でご参加等いただいて、ご意見いただけるようなことがあれば、非常に嬉しく思いますので、どうぞ今後ともよろしくお願いいたします。本日はどうもありがとうございました。
Yes, thank you everyone for coming and joining us. I will stop the recording now.